I must tell you, the last 2 weeks, and in particular today, it has been a real challenge for me in terms of resilience, innovation, and sustainability. Because after flying 100 hours to 4 countries to speak, Brazil, Philippines, Thailand, and Malaysia, I came back. Already my right leg was a bit sore. I went out the next day to do a lot of stuff, and the next day, my right shin began to hurt. Anyway, I've been diagnosed by the doctor as well as a physiotherapist that I have a minor slip disc that needs about a month to recover. So I have learned in the last 2 weeks or so and today how to navigate and survive when it's painful to walk. I'll tell you something funny that happened yesterday. Your plenary speaker, Madhurita, told me a few weeks ago that, oh, I'm coming to Singapore. And so I said, good, let's meet. And I told her I'm speaking at a conference on 30th May. She didn't tell me that she's coming here to speak. So I said, I have difficulty walking. I shall send the car to pick you up, come to my house for dinner, and then send you to the airport tonight for your 12 a.m. flight. Then I asked her, where should I pick you? She said, oh, Hotel Grand Pacific. Who? You speaking at the conference? Oh, so we're meeting today. And luckily for her, she don't have to come to my house tonight to eat a home-cooked Filipino meal. Why Filipino? Because my chef is a Filipino. So we'll be having a buffet dinner tonight. You heard earlier, or rather I understand, that yesterday you went to SIM campus for a tour. Can I tell you a story about SIM? You heard earlier the speaker introduced me. In 1987, we launched the voluntary certification of continuing education and development in the professional scheme. So we wrote to the Lee Foundation to ask for money. Actually, we didn't ask for money. We just asked for an appointment to meet. And so we went to meet the chairperson, Mr. Lee. And to our surprise, he said to us, oh, normally people only write to me to ask for money. You are actually not the first very rare ones to ask to come to see me without asking me for money. So to cut a long story short, he gave us 15,000 for the CBD scheme. But the person who went with me was Dr. Tan Jing Hee, who was then the Deputy Executive Director of SIM. And they were doing a campus building fund. Ooh, the Lee Foundation gave him $250,000. You see, in 1987, SIM was operating out a small building called Dong Teck Building in Scotts Road, which is near Orchard Road. And the highest qualification that they had at that time was the Diploma in Management Studies. Today, of course, they have a huge campus and a degree granting institution. Today, I'm going to talk about the Singapore economic success model and the most sustainable fiscal policy model in the world. Singapore has the most top rankings in the world, most competitive economy, number 1 for global talent competitiveness, number 1 for GDP per capita, number 1 for GDP per capita purchasing power parity, means that we are the richest country in the world. But of these 15 rankings, the most important one is that we are ranked number 1 for innovation. Next, please. Singapore, 744 square miles, island, 6.11 million. The stock of Singapore's direct investment abroad by the corporate sector is 1.7 trillion. And we have the highest reserves per capita in the world, estimated to be more than $2 trillion. Next. So, what will the future look like? Resilience, innovation, and sustainable future. I think the biggest impact will be the advent of AI. If you watch the news every day, you will realize that increasingly the unexpected, the unusual, the unprecedented things are happening in the world so fast. The new regulations effective next year in January says that crypto companies have to use all their money to buy US treasuries. Never ever happened before. Just look at the crash in practically all the bond markets today. US treasuries 30 years has hit above 5%, which is a 19-year high. So increasingly you find that the status quo is being shaken. Many institutions, cities and countries have been hit like a thunderbolt. So here is what I think some scenarios will look like for AI. Most of the institutions today using AI are focusing on, okay, can you increase productivity, reduce costs, and make the most profits from it? And because of this, you find that every other week, some big MNC in the world will announce layoffs of 30,000, 20,000, 10,000. So that's today. But going forward, more institutions will ask the AI not to focus so much on profits, but to focus on what I call welfare. And that is, sure, you want to use AI, you want to increase productivity, you want to reduce costs, but you want to minimize the adverse impact on your employees, on other stakeholders, and your customers. A few days ago, the Singapore government said, if you receive AI grants, you'll be taken to task if you do not treat your employees fairly. Right? So that is an indicator that going forward, regulators will increasingly look at what is the intention of institutions when they use AI. Now, the worst scenario is what I call exploitation. You will see some institutions using AI by saying, oh, can you make the service or the product as addictive as possible so that more and more people will use our service and product? Now, a recent court judgment in the US finding a big tech social company responsible for the death of a person who was addicted to the service is indicative of what may lie in the future. And as the AI progress, I predict more and more AIs will go to a mode of what I call well-being and humanity, meaning governments, institutions, individuals, when they use AI, will tell the AI, please, whatever you do, try to think about what is its impact on humanity, what is its impact on the well-being of individuals in humanity. So the future may be very upsetting in the short term. Many jobs may be lost, but in the long term, I'm hopeful that the world will be a better place. Next. Now, the good thing about AI is, AI is increasingly becoming whistleblowers. So it's much harder to do things that are illegal, unethical, unfair in institutions anymore. Not only that, AI is helping to prevent fraud because the AI can detect fraud much faster and arguably better than human beings. We all have a mobile phone today, right? A smartphone. I believe in 2 years' time, every one of you will be wearing AI glasses. Now, when you can't walk for 2 weeks, you have nothing better to do, right? So I did all kinds of things I never imagined I would do. I bought AI glasses. Now, for a sticker at $20, of course, AI glasses cost anywhere from $20 to more than $1,000. For like $30, you can buy an AI glass. You can tap, and I can take a picture of you. I tap twice, I can take a video of you. And if you call me on my phone, I don't have to take it out. I just tap twice, and I can talk to you. This is just a very basic or a cheap AI. The more expensive ones are increasingly, you have AI glasses that enable you to do practically everything you're doing on your phone today and your PC, and maybe even more. Next. Let me go back in time, since we are talking about innovation, and talk about innovation history. In the 70s, we had what we call suggestion boxes, you remember? So I had a friend whose son graduated, went to work, submitted 50 suggestions in a box, $5 each, that's $250. But the suggestions were so good, as the two students were telling us what the future may look like, the suggestions were so good, his pay of $7,000 was increased to $20,000 after 1 year. And he was given a very important position to the CEO of the organization. So, you remember in 1962, it originated in Japan. Quality circles focus on innovation. Groups would focus on improving quality, productivity, and safety through a structured bottom-up approach. So today, all this is still happening. Of course, you don't have suggestion boxes anymore. You email or WhatsApp or send your video or audio to whoever is supposed to receive your suggestions. In 2003, Singapore launched what we call the Cut Waste Panel. And initially in the first year, they received more than 500 suggestions. Cut Waste Panel means getting public feedback to reduce wasteful practices and suggestions to eliminate inefficiency. Next. Fast forward to today. The key, in my view, to survival or to be ahead of others in the future is the middle word of the theme of your conference today, innovation. Let's look at what Singapore is doing for innovation. In the budget that was announced this year in February, an innovation fund of $37 billion, which is about 1% of GDP, for research, innovation, and enterprise 2030 plan 5-year period. I believe Singapore is the first and perhaps the only country to have struck a deal with an AI to provide the very good AI tools for every student in Singapore. Enterprise Innovation Scheme from 2024 to 2028 400% tax deduction allowance, up to 400,000 of qualifying expenditure per activity per year. What does this mean? You spend 100,000 on innovation, you get to deduct 400,000 of your income tax. Crazy, right? But all this is to encourage and to support innovation. Productivity Solutions Grant to improve productivity and automate existing processes through IT solutions and equipment. Up to 50% of eligible costs for local SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises, up to 30,000 to improve your business productivity. Next. Now, innovation is not much about, oh, you need to invent something, there must be a technological breakthrough, you need patents. It's not rocket science. Sometimes it's simple common sense. And I give you some examples of why Singapore has been described as the economic miracle in modern times. Two examples of what we did that nobody else had ever done before that put us in our place today. You see, there was one recession, and so we asked the companies, particularly the foreign companies, how can we help you? Oh, they said, you know, the pension contribution rate very high. Can you cut it? We are the only country in the world who cut the pension contribution rate of 50% by a whopping 20% to 30% to help companies. So what did we do? Consistently, we send the message to investors, to companies, to people who come here to work, to study, right? That we bend over our backs and try very hard to help you succeed. Another example, there was another recession. And when we asked the companies, they said, oh, you know, we have no business now. So can we send our workers to go on leave? Okay, fine. And when they come back, if we don't have enough money, can we ask them to work without pay? Of course, if we are able to, we will do that. And later when we have money, then we pay them. You know what Singapore did? The answer was yes. You try this in any other country, there will be protests and riots in the streets, and the government will be out of job right by the next month. We started decades ago with a skills development fund, $500. Today is $4,000. And for people like me who are 72 years old, I think it's almost like $8,000. This is for you to go and learn practically thousands of courses that you want. Because innovation is all about learning new things. I'll give you a personal example of innovation. You see, innovation is really doing something that is different, and better still, nobody has done before. I was speaking at the OAS General Assembly, Business Roundtable. OAS is the Organization of American States. I think it was in Venezuela or in Fort Lauderdale, US. Halfway in my presentation, I threw my presentation papers at the audience. They thought it was a terrorist attack. And then I said, you know why I did that? I want to emphasize to you, Singapore has survived and become what it is today because we try very, very hard to be different. Next. You know when Singapore became independent in 1965? Which country Singapore was modeled after? Because that country was the poster boy and the darling of economic development in Southeast Asia, the Philippines. Where is the Philippines today compared to Singapore? I was just talking to Margarita. The peso has just hit an all-time low, I think of more than 60 pesos to the dollar. Next. So what are we doing with innovation today? I will describe it in one word: melting pot. What is melting pot? Every month or every other month, we run huge events. 20,000 people come to Singapore, right? For example, we have Slingshot, 6,800 startups for over 150 markets participated in Slingshot, with top 60 global startups joining in Singapore to forge connections. 300 exhibitors from Singapore and beyond. This has been called Asia's most exciting tech startup event. And then we have many others: GTEx AI, Asia Tech at Singapore, Singapore FinTech, and so on. So why do I call it a melting pot? You just get 20,000 people coming to Singapore, and you don't have to do anything. They will figure it out, and innovation will come. Whether it happens in Singapore, or it happens elsewhere, or it happens in collaborated Singapore. That today, quite simple, right? Is the magic formula of innovation. Next. You know, corruption impedes economic and social development. Singapore is ranked third in the world for the least corrupt country. The Philippines is ranked 107. Next. So next, I'm going to tell you how Singapore eradicated slowly corruption. I call this the 3-point Singapore anti-corruption model. Before I tell you the 3 points, I was speaking in the Philippines in March. Last year you had big floods, and then they discovered that $2 billion disappeared that was supposed to be used for flood infrastructure. But you know what? Thanks to AI, they managed to find the person in some remote place, I understand, in Eastern Europe. And the great thing about AI is they can not just find the person, they can list for you all the corrupt things the person has done with all the details and the amount involved. And so the good thing about AI, I believe in the future, is there will be lesser and lesser corruption. The 3 points. Point number 1, very easy to get caught. With a phone number that anyone can call and say, oh, I think this person is corrupt. Now, of course, if you maliciously accuse someone falsely, you may get into trouble. Okay? The propaganda was tremendous. When I was a young boy, you switch on the TV and you see all these advertisements about report corruption, report corruption. There was even a rumor of a son who reported the father for corruption. Point number 2, the penalty must be very severe. Next. Next, please. What do you mean penalty must be very severe? In the 1980s, the first cabinet minister who was found corrupt, it was rumored that he was asked to hang himself. Anyway, he committed suicide. So we sent the message to everyone. Very serious penalty for corruption. Last year, a cabinet minister was sentenced to 12 months jail for corruption. And you know what was the total amount of the corruption all added together? Not even $50,000. And what was the corruption? Football tickets, theater tickets, $100 wines. The highest value item of his corruption was to be on a private jet to another country to watch F1. And he was the minister in charge of F1. And he sat on the jet of the person to help to bring F1 into Singapore. So, we consistently remind people, corruption is serious. Today, if I give you $100, or you take $100 from me, we both go to jail for 3 to 6 months. The third point takes a bit longer, it's a bit more complicated. Why? Because in most countries that I have spoken in, civil servants cannot survive if there is no corruption, because the pay is too low. So what did we do? We asked civil servants, what are your financial concerns and financial goals in life? So they said, well, healthcare. What if I fall sick or my spouse falls sick? Okay, free healthcare for civil servants. Next, I'm worried I don't have a roof over my head. Okay, low-cost public housing, which I will talk about in greater detail later, not just for civil servants, but for the entire population. Pension. Oh. Pension for civil servants. Now, after listening to this, you must be thinking, hey, this must cost the government a lot of money, right? At the end of the day, it did not cost the government a lot of money. Why? Because I was a civil servant myself, and most of us, when we were offered conversion from our free pension and free healthcare to the normal national healthcare and pension scheme that every other Singaporean is under, most of us opted for it. Why? Because in the civil service pension and free healthcare scheme, you have to work non-stop until 55 to get the benefits. If halfway something happens and you quit, everything's gone. So most of us converted. And I will show you later, this provision of public goods and services, like public housing, pensions and healthcare, under the current system in Singapore, does not cost the government a great deal of money. Next. So far, everything sounds like a fairy tale, right? So let's look at the price of economic success. Most tired, fatigued nation in the world. Asia's most depressed nation. 144th most emotionless in the world. 4th lowest total fertility rate. 129 of 180 countries press freedom ranking. This is the price of economic success. So for those cities, countries, provinces who are trying to adapt the Singapore model, please learn from our lessons. Don't over-focus on economic development, because at the end of the day, you need to be happy, you need a balanced life. Next. Not all bad rankings are bad. I want to explain one to you that's actually very good. See, Singapore was ranked as the second lowest for libido in the world. So, very bad ranking, right? But let me explain why it was a very good one. How do you measure libido? You ask, right? How often you do it, how you rate your performance, how your partner and so on, right? And because Singaporeans are very honest, they tell the truth, that's why they're ranked so low. So it's a very good ranking, because if you come to a country to invest, to do business, to work, to visit tourists, to study, you like the people to be very honest, right? So here's is the bad ranking, that's actually a very good one. Next. One of the biggest problems facing most countries today is increasing budget deficits and increasing public debt. Let me use the United Kingdom as an example. You want to win the elections, you promise more benefits. After you win, to give more benefits, you need to increase taxes. Oh, cannot. Then you try to cut benefits, even worse. So what happens is, your budget deficits keep increasing, your external public debt keep increasing. The United States, another classic example, its public debt is $39 trillion. every year is going up by 2 over trillion. Just the interest alone a year is about 1 trillion, which is almost equal, if not more, than defense spending of the United States in a year before the Iran war. So this is where, as I said in the beginning, the first slide, the title of my talk, what can be a solution and perhaps the most resilient, innovative, and sustainable fiscal policy in the world is the Singapore economic, social, and fiscal policy model. Because in Singapore's model, we have budget surpluses in 4 out of 5 years. Last year, the budget surpluses was a record high of $15.1 billion. That's 60 over billion pesos. So, unless countries try to adapt the Singapore model, how are they going to get out of this track of increasing budget deficits and increasing external public debt? Next. These are just some numbers to show you our historical budget surpluses and cash budget surpluses, which are even higher if we use IMF fiscal accounting guidelines. Next. Practically every city or country in the world has a public housing problem. Why? Because every house the state builds, they lose money. In the Singapore model, every house the state builds, from a cash flow perspective, it does not lose money. You see, what happens is, if you can afford and you want to, you can buy a bigger public house in the most popular area and pay higher prices. The excess cash flows then enable the very poor and the very low income to have public housing as well. You know, if your household income is less than $1,500 in Singapore, you can get 100 over 1,000 smallest public flat in a not very popular area, which would normally cost, say, $120,000 without a subsidy, for as little as $10,000. You see, the maximum subsidy for a low-income household to buy a public flat, the maximum subsidy is $120,000. So, the one who don't qualify for any subsidy at all has to pay $130,000. This one, low-income family, pays $10,000. So, here is a system where those who want to and can afford paying more, so that those who can't also can have it. And look at the bottom line statistics. Singapore won the UN Habitat Award. More than 80% of the population lives in public housing. And more than 90% of these actually own their public house, which historically increased at about 5% per annum. So it's just not a home, it's an investment. Next. Our pension system is quite unique. You look at countries like France, every year they need to borrow more money, the deficits go up. Why? Because they have to pay pensions, which are what we call a defined benefit system. What's a defined benefit pension system? That means everyone is promised a certain pension based on their last income or what they contributed. So in such a system, you have a huge problem, because it's the younger people who work who has to pay enough so that the older people who are increasing can have their pensions. Now the Singapore model is very simple. It is not a defined contribution system, right? every Singaporean or permanent resident pays a percentage of his or her salary to the National Pension Fund. The state pays a fixed interest, no risk, to all the members. They take the money, they invest. In most years, the return they derive is greater than what they pay the members. So we estimate today, every year, the difference between what is derived from a pension investment and what is paid to the members is $10 billion. And over the decades, this may have accumulated to a few $100 billion. So now you understand, you know why. How come Singapore has so much money to do all this innovation, compete internationally, because of our very unique economic, social, and fiscal policy model. But you know what's very surprising? Conceptually, the Singapore model in these aspects is very similar to the Islamic finance concept of the sharing economy. What is the sharing economy? Sharing of the benefits and risks between the stakeholders in Islamic finance. So if you look at the Singapore model in the provision of public goods and services, it's very similar. Because those who want to and can afford is paying more and sharing so that those at the bottom, in the middle, can also enjoy the benefits. But as in many countries I've spoken, in many countries they say, oh, we cannot do this. Why? It's not fair. It's discrimination. It's inequality. But my answer is this. What is the outcome? What is the solution? Isn't it better for everyone to be relatively better off than to have like the National Health System, NHS in the UK? The quality of services keep getting worse. Wait times keep getting longer. And since I talk about NHS, let me talk about the Singapore healthcare system. Very similar. You go to a public hospital in Singapore, you can choose 1 room to yourself, 2 to a room, 4 to a room, 6 to a room. Of course, the 1 room, 2 room pay more than the 4 and 6 to a room. So those who can afford and want to will choose a 1 or 2 or 4 person a room, and on top of having a room to yourself or just sharing with 1, 3 or persons, you also have priority in testing. So if you pay more, you need some kind of lab test, diagnostic test, probably get it in a few days. If you're at the bottom, you are paying what we call C class or B2, the cheapest one, you have less priority, you have to wait. But of course, it's an emergency, everybody gets the same treatment. In addition, you get to choose your doctor. If you pay more, you can choose, I want this doctor because I understand he's the best in this public hospital for this operation. If you pay the lower rates, you can't choose. The computer will assign to you. So that's why, if you look at our healthcare system, the state may not need to spend a lot of money because those who can afford to and want to is paying more, so that in Singapore we have practically quality universal healthcare. If you are poor or low income, you practically get free medical treatment because every means test they test you, you would qualify. Next. Let's look at the Philippines as an example. Recently, you launched a sovereign wealth fund. Imagine if Singapore tries to adapt the Singapore model. In your sovereign wealth fund, or all your pension funds, right? The government gets to keep, say, 0.5% of the returns. The amount of money is tremendous, right? You keep going up. It will then solve your problem. Next. Next. The top 20%, 298,000 or 1.4 million households, have average net worth of $5.3 million. So if I may sum up, what is the key to Singapore's economic success? Is 60 years of continuing trial and error, learning from our mistakes, setbacks, learning from our lessons, to try to do things differently, and better still doing what has never been done before. And I urge you to try to do the same, whether individually, as an institution, as a city, province, or country. I'm going to end by making a prediction. In most conferences today, you find most of the speakers are reading from a script. I predict in future, there will be lesser speakers who speak from a script. Why? Because with the advent of AI, the AI can write part, if not a great part of the script for you. So if you read from a script, how do people know that most of the script is your original work? The AI can even speak with your face and your voice online or on screen. But one thing the AI cannot do, and here I must commend the two student speakers from Leong who spoke without a script. The AI cannot stand in front of you, human being, and speak without a script. And also increasingly, I think research will change. What we call today, as most research are, replicative, comparative, traditional thematic research, I predict will increasingly become less. Because increasingly the focus will be on innovation. What is the impact on your field, on your institution, on your community, on your city, on your country? What is the impact in